در ویدیویی که امروز برای شما ترجمه و زیرنویس کرده هم، دکتر جی اسمیت با رجوع به مستندات تاریخی و مورخین نامدار یونانی ثابت می‌کند که شهری به نام مکه در قرن هفتم میلادی، یعنی زمان تولد و حیات پيامبر اسلام، وجود خارجی نداشته است.
دکتر اسمیت همچنین اشاره قرآن به مکه را بی ارتباط به شهر مکه در عربستان سعودی می‌داند و معتقد است که کعبه واقعی جایی خیلی دورتر از شهر امروزی مکه و خارج از محدوده جغرافیایی اسلام بوده است. لطفاً نظرتان را در مورد این ویدئو در کامنت ها برای من بنویسید و اگر موافق هستید تعداد بیشتری از ویدئوهای ایشان را برایتان ترجمه و زیرنویس کنم. به همراه هم برویم و ببینیم دکتر اسمیت چه چیزی برایمان آماده کرده است.
Going through a number of historical errors or internal errors that are found in the Quran. And the reason why we're doing this is that we want to prove without a shadow of a doubt that the author of the Quran is a human being and only humans are prone to make these mistakes. Other than that, if it is indeed a divine source, as our Muslim friends would want us to believe, and that it is a perfectly preserved book, we wouldn't find that even a single one of such historical anachronisms. However, so far we have found 10 of them. We're just, giving you a flavor of the many errors that are found in the Quran. We're going to stick with Mecca today, and we're going to continue with yet another error that is found about another content related to the Quran and Mecca in this case. With me here, of course, in the studios to do so, our dear friend, Dr. J. Smith. Dr. J, what else do we have?
Yeah, now we're going to go to the Kaaba itself, which is referred to in the Quran in quite a few places. And the Kaaba would have been well known because the Kaaba just means, it just in Arabic, it just means cube. It's the same word actually that's in Hebrew. Kaaba is cube. And what's fascinating, the Kaaba in Jerusalem is actually the Holy of Holies there in Mount Moriah, the Kaaba, the cube. So it looks like they've just borrowed this word. Let's look at the slide and let's see what the Quran says. So in chapter 5, verse 97, in chapter 2, verse 125, and also verse 127, chapter 3, verse 96 and 97, chapter 14, verse 37, and chapter 22, verse 26 and 27, all assume that Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba. So the Kaaba is there being at the time of Abraham and Ishmael. Remember, Abraham and Ishmael, we're talking about way back in about 1900 BC. This is going on, if from the historical accounts. Well, the problem is there's the Kaaba. You see it pictured there on the right. Yet the historical record has Abraham in Canaan 1,000 miles further north in another Kaaba, which is the same word, up in Mount Moriah, where Abraham was supposedly going to sacrifice Isaac, not Ishmael and Isaac, according to biblical accounts. Now, the Kaaba we find is first in Jerusalem, and that's why when you look at see what they were doing in Jerusalem, they circumambulated that Kaaba counterclockwise 7 times. Why? Because that's what God demanded them to do in Jericho. And that's why whenever the Jews went to pilgrimage to Jerusalem, they went there to the dome, to Mount Moriah, where the Dome of the Rock sits today. And that's why you have that open area around the Dome of the Rock. That was a Jewish practice. Circumambulation counterclockwise, that is a Jewish practice. 7 times, that was a Jewish practice. All now has been borrowed and has now been recreated in Mecca of all places. The very same practice.
Now, are these historical facts? I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Josephus talks about this.
Yeah. Okay.
Josephus.
Okay, because
So
I
he
want people
refers
to
to
know.
the fact.
Yeah.
That's how we know this, because of and even the word Kaaba is in Josephus. So that's why we use Josephus for this.
Okay.
So we're not just making this up off the top of our head. So if that is the case, then you can see that much of this, I mean, even Marwa and Safa, Josephus talks about Marwa and Safa is also in Jerusalem. And he even uses the Arabic translation. That's why we know that Safa is Mount Scopus and Marwa would be Mount Moriah. The Arabic rendition would be Marwa and Safa. Isn't that interesting? Josephus talks about this in the 2nd century. They're now using this in the 8th and 9th century to refer to the same place, but they're just little rocks. They're not huge mountains like you have in
Oh, the Marwa and Safa in Mecca definitely have nothing to do with the Jerusalem one. It's just rocks, like you said.
20 feet high. You can climb on them.
That's true.
They do not make mountains. And certainly if Hagar was looking for water in those two rocks, she's only 100 feet away from the Kaaba. Why did she just knock on the nearest door? Because the place was surrounded. The Kaaba was in the middle of a city. There are people all around them. She just knocked on any door to get water.
Right.
So obviously those are facsimiles. If you have a facsimile, what's the original? The original would need to go to Jerusalem to find the original. You need to go to Josephus for that. Now, let's go back to the slide. So the Kaaba was first in Jerusalem. But here's what is not in Jerusalem, the black stone. And this is a real problem. Not only is it historical anachronism, this is a real difficulty because we pretty well know where that black stone comes from. And it's there, it comes from actually the Phoenicians who way back in the early BC period, it was a meteorite that fell to earth. They picked it up thinking this was a message from God. It was then grabbed by the Romans and was Elagabalus in the 2nd century AD, who then took it and brought it to Rome. And he was the one that instituted the idea that wherever that stone was, so was God's presence. That's why this became influential. It went from Jerusalem down to Damascus down to Petra, and then you have Zubair, who then rebels against his caliph, who is Abdul Malik. In 697, he rebels against him and grabs the black stone and sends it down with his wives and his women down to the south. Doesn't say where, because we now know today that would have been Mecca, and then stays there in Petra and gets killed by Al-Hajjaj. That we know is historical. So that happens in 697. It looks like that's why 687. That's why in 697, when we get the inscription at night, we pretty well know 10 years later that Mecca then was created. Why? Because wherever the black stone is, that is where God's presence is. If God's presence is with the black stone, the pilgrims all start moving down there and no longer to Petra or before that Jerusalem. They're now going to Mecca because the black stone is there. God's presence is there. So that is it. So the historical anachronism here is you've got a real problem here with all these references. Let's go back to the slides. All those references, therefore, put it in the wrong place and the wrong institution with the wrong idea. These should be in Jerusalem, where the original Kaaba is not, of course, in Mecca.
And if I remember, also Dan Gibson have his own channel, and he does address like the Black Stone, for instance, in Petra.
He does, yeah. And he's the one that's done all the work on it, and he's the one that actually shows that Zubair picked that black stone and had it shifted down to the south. So that's where we go to Dan Gibson and his research on it. Let's go back to the slide. Let's go to number 12. Staying with Mecca, let's ask this question. If Mecca is so important, and if it is the one, it is the city that is so historical, if it's the city that all this Masjid al-Haram are referring to, or chapter 3, verse 96 refers to the Mecca, if this is Mecca, then certainly someone should have known about it. There should be some reference to it. It should be well documented. We can't find any documentation whatsoever, so this is another historical anachronism. However, what's interesting, let's ask if there are other cities that are around near it that are also documented. Because maybe just the whole area, nobody knows about this whole area because it's a desert. Remember, where there's a desert, there's no water, no food, no people, no place, no city, no civilization, no history. That's why we could probably, that could be going on. Let's just ask that question. Maybe that's the problem that's going on. So let's go ahead and look and see what we do know. We have the city of Najran, which is just 400 miles south of Mecca. Is it referred to? Yes. Strabo refers to it in his Geographica from 64 to 24 BC. He was writing that. We have Pliny the Elder referring to it in 23 to 79 AD. We have Ptolemy referring to it in his geography, so he talks quite a bit about Nazareth. So does Aratus, about the martyrdom. He talks about it about 524 AD. What about these cities of Sana'a, Taif, and Yathrib, and Khaybar? Those are all the cities along the western plateau. Those are all cities that are all trade cities, but insignificant trade. We know the Yathrib only had about 200 people living in it in the 7th century. So therefore, it's very insignificant. Nothing more than oases for trade, for leather and goods like that. Do they talk about it? Yes. You have, and I got up there, the Greeks refer to it over and over again to those cities. They're well documented. Mamre, who I have way up there, up near where Petra, it's Clina does a whole history on Mamre. In 2011, he came out with that. What about Petra? Petra is well documented. Joukowsky has done the best work of looking at the whole historical context. There are so many references to Petra because it was the center of trade in that part of the world, and from the centuries that started before that. Maghrib, which is way down in the Hadramaut area, what would maybe Yemen. Muhammad Marakdad does a historical survey of Maghrib, showing that it was well known way back into the times of BC. Why are all these insignificant towns referred to, but not Mecca? That's the question we're asking. Mm-hmm. If Mecca is the greatest of all these towns, look at these are just oases. They're on the plateau, they're on the trade route, but that's the local trade route. And yet they're all referred to. There's historical reference after historical reference for all of them. Nothing about Mecca. So that's the question we're asking. This proves that this is another historical error. Obviously, they should never have chosen this one. Even the word Mecca, though it's only found in chapter 48, verse 24, the fact that it's in the Quran, the fact that all these references that Muslims believe are referring to it, the Masjid al-Haram or wherever the Kaaba is, that must be Mecca, shows that this is a huge glaring error.
Absolutely, and there is no doubt that all of these references are actually damaging to the Quran itself because they contradict the Quran, and yet these references by historians are attested for by others, but yet the references in the Quran are just a mere innovation by an author who clearly have lacked any knowledge of any historical facts or sources, and oftentimes it's borrowed even from questionable sources, to say the least. Until next episode, of course, when we will continue yet with another example or two.
دارم.